My name's Ian Barker, and originally from the UK, but now I live in Dallas, Texas. For the people that haven't followed along recently on various Delphi and Embarcadero things, I'm a developer pretty much all of my adult life, so about 36 years now, I think, or something like that, and Delphi since day one. I work for myself, but I do work relatively exclusively for some customers, so even though I work for myself, it's kind of more like working for someone else, if you see what I mean. I think that's typical for a lot of developers.
Yeah, I talk to a lot of developers who are that way, that are independent contractors, but they're predominantly working for a single client. You had commented you just finished some sort of project, right?
Yeah, I've just we're doing the documentation right now of a project that was originally written in 2006 by a contractor, and then a few other people have worked on it, and I've worked on it as well. Delphi 7, and originally BDE. And I'm sure some programmers will remember the BDE, and over the years, the BDE served people well, but it had a few issues. And so this project got moved from the BDE to MySQL, which is a lot more robust database. And it was showing its age. Not much development love had been given to it for some years. You know how these things go.
I was using the BDE with paradox tables then.
Yeah, they were at that point, and then they swapped to MySQL. The thing with the BDE is Windows basically obsoleted it bit by bit until eventually you could make it work, but sooner or later it was just going to fall in a horrible heap. You know, once Windows 10 really started taking over, that was pretty much the end of it. It is possible to make the BDE work, but you're juggling with fire, I think there. So we took that project, and I've been updating it from Delphi 7 to 10.3 Rio. And it wasn't too difficult. It was kind of almost an exercise in changes in fashion in development. Because, I know the guys, the two particular guys that worked on this project originally, and there was a lot of questionable formatting, shall we say, of the code, which is always a bit of a challenge when you go along and you see everything's all moved over to the left and it's not indented. I think a lot of us developers, we have our ways of laying out ifs and thens and begins and stuff like that. Well, there was a lot of that going on in the code. Nothing wrong with it. It's just very, very different. And of course, when you're working on something to scale, like some of these projects are that I work on, where, some of them have got 500,000 lines of code in or something like that. If you're going to have more than one person working on it over time, then it needs to be that you all agree a set of standards that everybody can live with. And really, I've always found, working at various software houses in Delphi, is that the way it's done in the VCL source code and things like that tends to be the way that works for most people. And if you start, monkeying around with laying out things in a weird way, then, it's a slippery slope before everybody hates you. Some of the software houses I've worked at, they're very keen to have everybody on an agreed set of standards, and you can't just do things your own way. And I suppose now, even though I'm a mostly single developer on his own, I still try and stick to those standards, because although people aren't always coming along and seeing my code afterwards, the rockstar developer isn't going to work, put it that way. You've got to be a team player, even if there isn't much of a team sometimes.
That's a good point. I think it's important to have consistency. There is value, and I think it's a good idea to specifically do things where it's like, I'm going to experiment. I want to try something completely different, right? And say, okay, that's going to be in this container here. And if you decide that's a good idea, let's adopt that in production. But otherwise, let's just put that container aside. That was a fun experiment.
The thing that I always find as well is that as a developer, you don't want to go back and look at code you wrote 20 years ago, and I can do that. And you look at it and go, oh my God, nobody must ever see this code. Nobody. Because what happens is you evolve as a developer. And so consequently, you start to learn about, dependency injection and all the cool things that you should have, like the people that are watching Chapman World, where we've been doing this live stream, and they'll see all the things like model view controllers and model view models and stuff like that. These are all relatively recent innovations. And so, you do go on and start to use those techniques, but the important thing is putting comments in the code as well, because if you've started to learn a new technique and you say, well, actually, this is such a good idea, I should start adopting it because it is the standard that nearly everybody's working to now. Most people try and do dependency injection because they can see the value of separating out, the logic into testable areas and stuff like that.
Right.
It's best to comment on it because particularly if the code starts to get a little bit abstract, when you come back to it 12 months later, or in my case, sometimes 9 years later or something like that, I can't remember. Once I finished a project, it goes completely out of my head.
Yeah.
I don't know about yourself, but whilst I'm writing the code, I could tell you exactly where a line of code was to fix a particular bug. Someone tells me it's doing something wrong, and I know where that is exactly. But once I finish with that project and it's shipping, and I have a lot of shipping code out there that's, people are using it for various payrolls and things like that around the world, my brain just unloads somehow. I wake up one day and I forgot everything about that program. And I have programs that people ask me, how does it work? And I swear I don't remember writing a single line of the code. There are about between 3.5 and 5 million people in the UK clock in and out with systems, fingerprint systems, hand scanners, proximity badges, turnstiles and things like that are using programs that I've written. I mean, I didn't get the money for them. I got paid to write them, but those are a lot of employees that are out there doing that, and they have no idea. They don't know that they're using a system that's written in Delphi. It just works and keeps on working. I keep telling people this is why you should use Delphi. It's reliable,
I've actually had a number of projects I've done like a while ago and kind of forgotten about, and people come back later and like, oh, can I get something added to this? I'm like, oh, you're still using it? Like, oh yeah, it's been working great. And I'm like, oh.
Yeah, where did you get this from? Oh, I wrote it. Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I have we have support people that do the technical support, and generally they don't come to me until I'm the last resort. Nobody else can fix it. So let's go back to the guy that works on the code, and let's talk to him about it. And the first thing I have to do is teach myself how to use that piece of code again. It's a bit embarrassing. And of course, it's always the way. The tech support people know how to use the program way better than you do, and the customers know how to use the product even better than the tech support people. And usually the developer is the last one. You know how to use certain features really well because you've just worked on it. But,
and usually as a developer, you have a specific way you think about using it. And
you're
like, oh, okay, I guess you could do that. I never would have thought of that.
Well, do you know what? I had the classic thing today. I developed this project, and the marketing director, he's like, oh, can you install it on my machine? Yes, of course I can. So I go and install it, test it. It's all working fine on his machine, absolutely perfectly. I leave him a note because I've remoted in, and he's remote because he can't go in the office because of the COVID-19 thing. And I go back to my machine, and it won't work on my machine. And that's the first incident I've come across of where it works on their machine, but not on my machine. Usually it's the other way around.
So I made a note here, and I'm going to comment about this. But I've used CMPAC a little bit, but not a lot. Have you used CMPAC a lot?
Yes, yeah. And in fact, GExperts and CMPAC, they're the two that I would say are almost essential.
I would love to schedule another time, and you could show me how to use CMPAC.
Okay. Those and GExperts. I like GExperts. The one thing I really like in GExperts is the align function. Have you seen this? I set mine to be Control Shift and Z or Z. And what it does, it'll say which identifier do you want to align on, and it aligns all your assignment operators. Actually, I find it's a bit more clarity when you've got a lot of code and in a particular method or something like that, and or a class lining up the word read, for example, makes it a little bit easier just to see what's going on sometimes. Some people really abhor that, But what can you do? You can't please everybody all the time.
Yeah, those are great. I love those. So the project you just finished, you were moving some stuff from Delphi 7 to Rio. Is that right?
Yeah, to Rio, and using FireDAC for the database components.
From the BDE, yeah. Did you use refines for the migration?
We'd gone to the BDE, and then they'd gone to something like AnyDAC or MyDAC, I think, or something like that. But actually, there was a problem with the MyDAC components, which I'm sure they fixed now. I do like their components. They're pretty good.
Oh, yeah.
But the FireDAC is obviously comes with Rio. And then we wrote a web server. So I added a custom web server using Indie HTTP server. And what that allows us to do is we're using TMS Web Core to produce a bunch of web pages. So what the people have got is a tablet or a laptop or a desktop browser. Can work on any operating system, Windows, Linux, Mac, we don't care. As long as you've got a compatible browser, they can then clock on off these jobs. It's for job labor tracking. So let's say you're a company that manufacture furniture. The idea is that you go up and you scan a barcode for making a bunch of furniture for Embarcadero, for example. And the job might include a bunch of tables, a bunch of chairs. So the idea is it records each step, cutting the wood, preparing the wood, doing all the things to do. And then you can price out the job and say how long it took you and work out which parts are efficient. You can record how many parts are accepted and how many are rejected, because obviously sometimes when they cut wood, the wood splits, something goes wrong with it, it's got a knot in it, and so they reject it. Quality control reject it. That's all browser-based. And so they can have a cheap Android tablet. It works on 7-inch or 10-inch, I think. They have it by their unit. And of course, in these times of no contact, it's their own tablet. That's the only one they use. They're not going to a time clock that's shared, which is typical in most, we do sell hardware that is, manufactured in China and places like that, and various other countries. Italy, I think, also do some as well. But now with this browser-based stuff, that links back to a Windows service that is written in Rio and has got the Indie web server in there. And the Indie web server basically provides a REST interface, which I custom wrote as well, and an API. And the TMS web core and the service talk to each other, and then it updates the MySQL database. And meanwhile, the existing piece of code that we upgraded to Rio does all the thick client reporting. So that's running on people's Windows PCs and gives them a bit of an upgrade. So there's a reason for them to upgrade, and also a reason for people to buy it in the first place. And that's what I did. So it took about, I think we started it around about February time, something like that. I had to go over to the UK for a while, so there's a bit of a hiatus while I did some actual IT management stuff for a while. But that was done reasonably quickly. I think the company always want it quicker, and the marketing people always say, surely it'll only take you 2 weeks. And what do you mean it'll take you 3 months or something? So, but, that's the nature of software development. And I think when I first started out as a developer, I used to be very optimistic about how long something would take. And now, as I've got older and more or less irreplaceable, I can actually say to people, no, it really will take this long. And we can still do it much more quickly. There's one guy, 2 months, and we've got a whole brand new product line. And that product line will, it'll produce a significant amount of revenue in the next 12 months. And ironically, this company who specializes in human resources and time and attendance, they're going through a boom at the moment because lots of people need to manage how many days have they been furloughed and how many days sickness have they got on top of their furlough, because some people get sick and then they have a different type of sick pay assigned. And people start to worry about the bottom line and keeping track of how much time people are working, how much overtime they're doing, and also how much a job is costing them. So from our point of view, things are doing better. And that weirdly enough is often typical in a recession. Company's been around 30 years, so they know what it's like.
I was going to ask you, was there anything besides like the CNPAC component replace utility, any other things you found as far as this whole migrating things that was a great tip as far as migrating code from 7 to Rio?
Have 7 in a virtual machine. That would be my first tip. And there's 2. I've done a few projects like that, and I would say that the first tip is it depends on how many forms you've got and how closely integrated they are. The number one death blow for conversions are things like live bindings and data-aware controls. Because if it's written with data-aware controls, which used to be, everybody used to do, it was the Visual Basic way of doing things, actually, in some ways, back in the day. The original version of Visual Basic kind of had that methodology in there. But the problem with data-aware controls is when you go to start replacing things, the link between the field and the database, tables or queries or views or whatever it is, can get broken very easily, and it's not very obvious that that's happened. And consequently, you then get a big problem trying to test, why is this thing not working? And you have to go back and look at the Delphi 7 code. Was there some data-aware controls? Oh, yes, there was. That's why, my query that I've converted to FireDAC now doesn't have that link between the data-aware controls. So in that respect, that can really slow things down. And this particular project did have quite a few of those.
So do you convert it from data-aware controls first and then? Okay.
Yeah. What I do is I go through and try and make a list of all those things I think are going to be a problem. Start with the easy dialogues and work backwards. So they had some custom editing dialogues where you would double click on a grid and up would come this editor, and then it would write back to the database. So what I did there was replaced the kind of data-aware, old-fashioned way of doing things with model and view controller. So it would actually write the data back using the controller back to the model, and the model would then have the controller would then write back the contents of the model back to the database. That way, the problem goes away because everything is in front of you. You can see what's being written and what isn't being written. The advantage of that as well was that I could then reuse some of those units for the web server part of it, because I'd created a bunch of classes and a bunch of interfaces and things like that, and I could reuse them in the web server to retrieve the data and then send it off to the web pages. And then I could reuse some of those classes, but not all of them, in the TMS web core web pages. And so there was a lot more code reuse. And that, of course, is the secret to getting things done quickly, is to do it slightly intelligently. And how am I actually going to make this a bit more modern and use the techniques of modernity that are useful rather than the techniques that are just fashionable? And I think there are some techniques that, I see some web streams, particularly for .NET. It's a very big sin in .NET. I don't know why, but they do some things in there. And I have no problem with the languages, but some of the things they do, you almost think they're doing them to say, look at how clever this is. And I don't care about clever. What I care about is that the product is saleable. And that's what the people that pay me care about. They're not interested. They don't care how I write the code. I could hack this code out horribly, and as long as it was functional, they wouldn't care. The quicker it got done, the better, and that's the typical kind of marketing and sales attitude. I don't care if it's a model view controller, this and that. Is not interested. And so that would probably be the first thing that I would say, is go through and find out the data aware controls, because that kind of hidden, buried link can be a problem. And data binding, unfortunately, I think is the modern version of data aware controls. And they're great because you can bind them to all sorts of things, and it can make you have a very good program that uses very little code to achieve what it wants to do. But at the same time, it can also hide the functionality quite effectively and cause you a problem.
I've talked to a few people that have said that live bindings is the way, this kind of the prototyping, right? So you go through, you live bind it, you get it all working, and then, okay, we're done. We'll go back and refactor it now and change that away from live bindings.
I can see how that might be the case. It's not how I would do it. I would rather do it. I don't want to sit here and say, hey, I'm an MVP, and people go, oh, you must do everything the right way. And no, not true, not at all true. I'm first and foremost a software developer, and I've done it a long time, and I've used Delphi a lot. So yeah, I probably know more than some people, but there's code out there that I've written where I don't want anybody ever to see it again, and so when you're working on people's projects that they've written, it's extremely difficult. And also, I should say as well that in defense of the developers who wrote this particular project, and I did work with these people, so I know them, and then they no longer work for the company, and I know they've moved on somewhere else. Some of their comments in the code are hilarious. Some companies, they have a kind of comment cleanliness, where you only describe the code and the rest of it. Some companies allow you to put a few little, I don't know how this will work, I'm sure it will though, kind of comments. And then some allow you to just do what you like. And in this particular case, this developer did make quite a few comments along the lines of, I was told to do this way by the marketing so-and-so, and there were an awful lot of like, very bitchy, I think is the word I'm looking for. And that's company politics. That's what happens. But you kind of look at it and you go, okay, I know some of the decisions you made here. I think you made them because you were kind of painted into a corner by, circumstances of the business and by decisions being made for expediting the project rather than getting something done the right way. And we all know that most projects that I work, usually if I go and help someone on a project or go and work with a company I've not worked before, particularly if it's a handover from a previous developer, they'll normally start by saying, I'm so glad you're here. I'm so sorry about some of the things you're going to see in the code. You're like, hey, I've been there. I know. Me too.
Yeah.
We all do it. We all do things where there's that little hack where you think, I just don't have time to work this out. I've got to do it this way.
I think, well, you mentioned earlier about, how as a developer we evolve. I think it's a good idea to take time to clean those things up. I remember one place I worked and there was one unit that you opened it up and had a comment that says, "Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive." And it was full of all these hacky workarounds and strange behaviors and stuff like that. It was one of those things that no one wanted to get a change request tied to this unit because it's such a pain. And at one point, one of the developers took time and sat down and fixed it all and went through and removed the go-tos and the weird, strange behavior and stuff like that and refactored it and made it a lot better to work with. So things, whether it be your code that you wrote with a previous way of looking at things or somebody else's code, as we
or it was the code that you were able to write at that time. And I've been around long enough to see fashions in coding and improvements in just style, technique, and also improvements in the language. Someone was complaining the other day, I won't name who he was, but it's a developer I know in the UK, and he'd inherited a project from someone, and he was saying, oh my word, they've used list boxes to store these values in instead of string lists. And I said, yeah, you know what? That actually used to be quite common back in the day. And the reason was people would debug by making those list boxes visible so they could see the values coming rather than go through the debugger, because the debugger at the time wasn't quite as competent as it is nowadays. And there weren't the same kind of logging tools. So people would put them into the list boxes and go, oh, now I see what it's reading in from this, I don't know, CSV file or something like that. But of course, once they've done that, they quite often don't go back and undo that kind of hacky, inefficient sort of way of doing things. And you see pieces of code where people are loading controls and they don't know about, begin update and end update. And so they're loading a bunch of stuff in here manually and wondering why it's so slow. Now, this particular project, weirdly enough, it did something very odd with MySQL, which took a minute to do. And I just changed a couple of things and it loads in 4 seconds. So, and I didn't do anything particularly special. It's just that someone had obviously not had the time to go back and work out why it was so slow. They probably hate me now. I'll probably get, hate mail or something. I heard what you said. Sorry. I'll get people going, oh, here's some code of Ian's. This is what he worked on in 2002. See how rubbish it is, Please don't do that. I'll pay anything.
We've all got skeletons in our closet.
Well, yeah. They were saying as well that their source code control of this particular person was password-protected zip files. That's not source code control. That's passing the buck around, I think.
There is a lot of people that still use that, surprisingly. It
was around for a very long time, and Jedi VCS worked very well in Delphi 7, and when someone's used it because it used to put comments at the top of each unit as you checked in the code. And so you have in a way, it was quite clever because you could look at the top of the unit and you could see the full history of the check-ins and what they'd changed. And as long as they put some sensible commit comments in there, then you could see what they'd done. But that fell out of fashion. But it was okay. Now with Git, there's no excuse really.
Yeah,
it makes life so much easier. Or I know a lot of people like SVN as well, but
I was going to say, there's some pros and cons to both. Git certainly fashionable, but yeah, between one of the two, you really should.
Most people that use SVN like the idea of the submodules because SVN uses submodules very effectively. But I did see Craig and Andrea Magni on Sunday when we were streaming the apocalyptic coding stuff. They were doing submodules in Git. You know, it is possible. It's not quite as good as SVN's way of doing it, but it is theoretically possible to get submodules so that when you do a pull and a commit, then you're getting all the right things, even for the submodules that you haven't done for yourself. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Great.
It's an interesting
world.
Well,
I love, this is a great chance to get to talk, and we don't talk often enough. So anything else you wanted to mention or add before we go?
Not really, no. I hope everybody's safe and well. And, you know, I know that I'm not quite sure when this recording will get out, but hopefully at some point the life will return to normal for everybody. It is gradually happening. Texas seems to be rushing towards opening everything, so you may not hear from me soon when we get locked back up again. Yeah, it's good. It's good, and I do enjoy, you know, talking to other developers, and especially as a developer that works from home. Self-isolation is part of my normal daily routine, same as
me too.
I think. Yeah, exactly. So it's good to be able to talk and discuss development. You know?
Cool. All right, great.